Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. Hello to you in the last episode of this month, and the last episode of our GULAG series, the GULAG KGB series to be more exact, because we will move away from the gulags this time, as this episode is intended to be sort of a, wrap-up episode, so to speak. I'm a bit confused here, because a lot of subjects to talk about, and a lot of conclusions to draw, actually. Not a simple episode to make, as usual, but this series has to end, and I want to end it on a philosophical note. Oh yeah, and before we even start with that, I would like to apologize to the people who felt offended by my PDRP episode, which I published just a few days ago. If you disagree with the opinions stated there, feel free to comment, as many have done. But so that you know, I'm a journalist. I am all for freedom of speech. I don't endorse anything going on in any of my podcasts. I just want people to think, and a lot of people have been disappointed about this fact, and I've lost quite a few Patreon supporters. But I hope that, this tendency will change for the better, because it was never my intention to offend anyone. On the other hand, other people just are complaining that we apologize too much, so what do you know? Anyway, this complaining might actually be one of the things that I want to talk about. You see, to encompass all of this gulag thing, all of this KGB thing, means to talk about what does it mean for a country to live under such an oppressive regime for so many years. It leaves scars, you see, and my sense of guilt all the time for no reason, my very low self-esteem, and my sense of inferiority when it comes to Westerners, which I'm trying to fight. No, I'm really trying to fight it, but it is still there. It's somewhere there in my backbone that I should somehow feel inferior to other people, and that I should apologize that I'm always guilty. That is the result of this. And even though I lived in the Soviet Union only for a short period of time when I was a kid, I was raised that way. I was raised by Soviet people. I was raised this way, and interestingly enough, we were raised in this way of Soviet morality, and then our parent generation is also often surprised that we are not the greatest of capitalists around, and that a lot of us have even lower self-esteem than mine, and that we have hard times achieving things in this capitalist society. But it's hard to be a very successful person if you have been raised on essentially gulag morality, all your childhood. And that is why this episode it's hard to explain it, because it's not an exact episode. It's not an episode on precise dates. It's an episode of influences. It's an episode on what you become after living in the USSR. It's an episode on how you feel after it. It's an episode on how a PTSD for a nation feels like, and how it must have been to live there, because that wasn't easy, and it was even probably harder than you imagine, even if you listen to the previous episodes. And what you probably don't understand is that how people try to escape from this. So before I start about all the normalization and everything, I would like to start with an act of terrorism, to be honest. I don't know, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. In this case, one man's terrorist is another man's escape attempt, apparently. But I'm talking about the Aeroflot flight number 3739, which happened in 1988, the 8th of March. See, one of the most popular Soviet planes, about which many jokes were made, which is kind of a shoddy quality, was one of these Tu-154 planes. Tupolev planes, but the official number is Tu-154. Essentially, it was a flight that had left Kurgan to Leningrad. It's basically a domestic flight within the Soviet region. And it was hijacked by this family, by this group of people who wanted to escape from the Soviet Union. And these people kind of, I don't know what they thought, but apparently they were desperate because they demanded that the airplane fly instead of Leningrad, today St. Petersburg. They demanded that they would fly to London. The family was called Ovechkins. There were 13 of these Ovechkins in total. There was mother Nina, and she had 11 children, 7 sons and 4 daughters. And after her 10th kid, this Nina Ovechkina became a hero mother. Mother heroes. The Soviet Union awarded those mothers who had given birth to a lot of kids. And her husband, Dmitry, had died in 1984, and she was a mother heroine, and not just because of the amount of the children, but because she was raising them by themselves. Her little boys, little kids, her seven sons, they had started a music band. The music band was called Seven Semyons. Semyonov, basically. It's kind of, it rhymes in Russian, you see. And they had managed to become very popular, actually, and they had been to Japan for a tour, and the picture of Semyonov, these 7 Semyons, will be accompanying this episode. And these people saw how life was abroad. They saw your way of living, and they decided to leave the Soviet Union and settle abroad, which was not allowed by the Soviets. Well, by the late 80s, it was allowed, but only if you were like very old, 70, 75, something like that, very late after retirement. What I don't understand about all this case is why they just didn't escape when they were in Japan or on some other trip. This is the most interesting part, but yeah, they decided to hijack an aircraft to just kidnap it. Not everyone though. They had a daughter, Lyudmila, which apparently had living separately for a while. She had her own apartment with her husband. She was quite separated from the family. And to tell you where all this is going, she ended up in a mental hospital and died a terrible alcoholic. But yeah, these Ovechkins, they entered this flight 3739, and what happened next was quite stunning, because this is one of the... Actually, I didn't know about this event since... There's a guy you don't know, he's my quality control. He also designed the logos for the show. He doesn't want to be mentioned a lot. I've mentioned him on a few episodes, but he just told me about this situation and I researched it more. But yeah, thanks to Einar here. That means nothing to you, but I guess... but be sure, Einar is now calling me and yelling at me for telling his name on air. But these Ovechkins... This case made me think a lot. You see, they entered this airplane, right, and... they have acquired guns and have made even shotguns with them, or handguns. Sources differ on this fact. Some sources say they had sort of shotguns, some sources say they had Makarov pistols and handguns. They hid the weapons, and you see they were this musical family. And they were a popular musical family, and they had basically metallic musical instruments. Like a trumpet or a tuba or something, and it automatically fails the metal detector test, and they can't be checked, right? And these Ovechkins said, even on their previous flights where they tested these methods, that it's just too valuable to be put in the luggage department. I mean, what if their very expensive and important instrument breaks? So they hid weapons and nail bombs and ammo bombs. Apparently they had a bomb made from 100 ammunition things banded together. I don't know, 100 bullets? It doesn't sound right, but still they had a couple of bombs, one of which was a nail bomb. They also hid some of their stuff into a double base, and some was somewhere in the tube, and essentially this... Imagine this nice family of a mother, and a bunch of her family members. Not every Ovechkin was there, don't worry, no. But a lot of Ovechkins were there, and some of them just decide to do this. So, how and what did the Ovechkins do? Well, everything went kind of smoothly at the beginning. You see, before landing in this Leningrad city, near the town of Volgoda, the flight crew got handed a note through a flight attendant. You know, you call the flight attendant and just give them a note, casually, with your musical instruments in your hands, which are filled with guns and bombs and everything. And the note said, quote, "Proceed to England. Do not descend. Otherwise we will blow up the plane. You are under our control." And they start to panic. Meanwhile, the note is somehow handed back to these Ovechkins, and they burn it in the cabin. The aircraft captain immediately transmits a silent distress signal and reports the emergency to this town of Volgoda air traffic control, because obviously every remote town ever has an airport with it. So on the ground, they start an operation. It was called Operation Nabat, which means an alarm clock. You know, alarm signal, basically, translated literally. And shortly after this, a flight attendant came back into the main hall of the airplane, and she informed the passengers that they would, instead of Leningrad, land in Finland, in the town of Kotka, to refuel, because they had an emergency. And, you know, if they were about to fly to England, they needed to refuel, so they would land in Finland for this. But the ground services, essentially the people on the ground, had told the captain to land on Soviet ground instead, just in the military base somewhere. I can't really find the exact one, but to land in the Soviet military airbase. And the flight engineer obviously had figured this plan out, and he had contacted everyone. So this is what happened. And this is where the story gets less fun, if it even was fun before. Dmitry Ovechkin, who obviously was one of the people hijacking the plane, being of the family and of the band, he killed this flight attendant. He shot her. And as the plane kind of came down, they sent in armed Spetsnaz soldiers. Armored, well-trained Spetsnaz soldiers to storm the plane. And 5 of them stormed up on the front. But the thing is, they didn't storm the plane the usual way. No. They started by blasting their guns straight into where the pilots sit in the front of the plane. And the second group, meanwhile, tried to breach from behind it. So, at that moment, when these things started to happen, one of the Ovechkins shouted to the crew via the communication system. He just yelled through the plane, "Командир, скажи своим не стрелять!" Or, "Командир, скажи своим, чтобы не стреляли." That's 2 different reports, which basically mean the same thing. "Commander, tell your guys not to kill our guys." And while this is being screamed, another of these Ovechkins, Alexander Ovechkin, he decides to fuck it. He looks at his brothers, looks at his mom, looks at his younger sisters, and says, "I would rather die than live in the Soviet Union. I'd rather die," and he detonates his bomb. This fortunately had a limited effect, because Only he died from the explosion, and just a fire happened in the aircraft's tail, which was later extinguished. But seeing this, the mother, Nina Ovechkina, she told Dmitry, the same guy who had killed the flight attendant who had tricked them before, she turns to Dmitry and says to him, "Shoot me." She also didn't want to be captured alive. None of them wanted to be captured alive. And he shot his mother. After that, he shot himself. Dmitry at the time was 24. 3 other people, by the way, shot themselves too. Vasily Ovechkin, 26, shot himself. Oleg, 21, also shot himself. The other Alexander, also 19, shot himself. 6 other people were on this board from the family. And they survived this ordeal. Olga, Igor, Tatiana, Mikhail, Ulyana, and Sergei. They were also... Olga was 28, she was the oldest one, Sergei was 9. And interestingly enough, three passengers, flight attendant died because she was shot by Dmitry. 3 passengers were killed by the guys who were trying to storm the plane. And because, and by the way, the other 20, approximately 20 to 36 to 40 passengers were injured because of the people who stormed the plane and shot them, because they just blasted through everything they could see. Some were hit by the bomb, but most of them were really hurt because the nice Spetsnaz, they didn't care. They just decided, let's go in, guns blazing, screw this, blow everything up, shoot people. 14 of them were injured very hard and were in need of serious operations and surgery later. Igor and Olga, by the way, the oldest guys here, Igor was 17, Olga was 28, these were sent to trial. They were sentenced in the very same year. They were sentenced to 8 and 6 years in prison, respectively, by the way. Olga gave birth to her daughter Larissa when she was in prison, only to be beaten to death by her boyfriend in the year 2003. Yes, so Olga passes away in 2003. Interestingly enough, the 28-year-old flight attendant Tamara was killed by Dmitry, who tried to appease them and trick them. She got an order. She got an order of the Red Banner after her death. And thus ends the tale of Ovechkins and Semyonov, who wanted to escape the Soviet Union so bad. They had been so fed up with the system that they tried to kidnap a plane and blow themselves up and shoot themselves rather than live in the country. It led to many deaths and was a sad incident. And of course, no one in the Soviet Union knew about this only after the collapse. The collapse, which actually happened exactly 3 years, almost to the day of this incident. If they had only waited for a while, they could have saved so many people. They could have not caused this trouble. Even the very next year, 1989, was already full with turmoil. And this is perestroika that we're talking about. Usually perestroika is associated with some sort of, liberty, and Gorbachev is portrayed as a very good person. Well, he cared for his people, I have to give him that, but that doesn't mean the life in the Soviet Union was good. It wasn't. Whomever tries to tell you that it was extremely good and amazing, they're lying. There are no people from wealthy countries where life is decent and nice who want to escape to other countries from their own country by capturing a plane and rather would explode and kill their own family members. You had to shoot your own mother rather than be taken alive. And this incident and all this situation And all this very idea that, a family, a 19-year-old boy, okay, he's not a boy anymore technically, he's an adult by that point, but still he's just 19, that he would shoot a flight attendant, then his own mother, and then watch everyone else die? That he would hijack a plane like this? It's insane. Because the Soviet system was insane. This is what happens when you live in a total prison environment. Why was the desperation so deep? Well, because the crimes were. The crimes were terrible, and it influenced everything. I've mentioned a couple of times before that among a lot of people, the Soviet Union was just called Большая Zona, or the Big Zone. For those of you who played Stalker games, you'll know what I'm talking about. The big prison. We acted like this. We were forced to do it this way. And it still is there to a point, I think. I think it's there to a point for a lot of people. It explains a lot about why Eastern Europe is the way it is right now. It explains a lot about why we are, in a way, depressive and quiet, and why a lot of people make darkness jokes. By the way, about jokes, I scanned through my huge collection of political anecdotes about the Soviet Union, and there were some who are funny, but they make more sense if you put them into this global scarring perspective, because everyone knew someone who had been deported to Siberia or sent to gulags. Everyone. So these jokes, they are slowly turning into a coping mechanism, actually. For example, there's this one that Armenian radio gets called and asked, will there be KGB under communism? And Armenian radio answers, no, by that point people will have learned to arrest themselves. And then there's another one, which goes like this. A fourth TV channel has just started transmitting in the USSR. On the first day, a citizen sits down and starts watching the first channel. Well, there's Brezhnev, and he's giving a speech. So he turns on the second channel, and it's Brezhnev again, and he's still doing the same speech. Then he turns on the third channel, and it's the same thing, as usual. Every channel is showing the same thing. But he has the fourth channel now, so he turns on the fourth one, and there is a KGB Colonel Ivanov, and he threatens him with a finger. Now, comrade, aren't we over-switching here? Because CTV was controlled, media was controlled, everything was controlled, and these jokes are not funny. They are, but they're funny in this very grim, dark way, which can only be understood if you've listened to my previous punishment episodes. And then there were some which might be sort of treated as anti-Semitic, possibly. Hebrews and Jews were, I guess they are the same people, but we're Hebrews, the politically correct term here in Latvia, so whatever. These people were kind of in a lot of these political jokes, but it's because they all came from these Jewish communities, especially in Odessa. Russian Jews were responsible for most of Russian political jokes, and they were always depicted as, the sneaky and cunning guys, kind of playing to the stereotype, but they weren't the villains and ever, so it's complicated. So, hey, I can tell these jokes anyway, but I hope you listeners won't mind because of my own Jewish blood. So, Rabinovich gets called to KGB, and he gets asked, turns out you have a brother in Israel. Rabinovich says, but I haven't spoken with him for 30 years already. And he gets told, well, what a shame. He's fighting against imperialism and supports the policies of the Soviet Union. So, comrade, don't be afraid. Here you go, have some paper and a pen and start writing now. So Rabinovich just sighs and starts writing. Dear Haim, finally I have chosen the right time and place to write to you. I hope you are fine. You see, they're all about living in constant fear. In constant fear and oppression and and everything. And there's this final one about the fact that, Stalin goes to hell, and they in hell they just don't give him his own pit. They just throw Stalin on the feet of Karl Marx and states, "Well, dear Karl, here are the dividends on your capital." We hated the situation. We were scarred. We were damaged. And it changed us. It changes me. And this is why, this is why I sound like a complete amateur while doing this episode, because this episode demands a lot of reflection on my own part, a lot of understanding on where I stand and how this has influenced me. But yeah, all the society was basically criminalized. It was considered to be normal, because if you live in a gigantic prison and almost prison-like mentality about the fact that you are already a criminal. I mean, what I mentioned in part 2 of Gulag episodes, Article 58, everyone's a criminal. Everyone is a criminal for whatever reason. They can make you guilty, so what's the point of not being an actual criminal? And this, by the way, wasn't as strong in the late Soviet era, even like in the 70s. It was there, but it was more hidden. But all hell broke loose when this criminalized society hit capitalism. And I'm going to talk about this in December, because we're going to start January with Russian Revolution, mind you. But in December, we'll touch the early 90s, because people asked me for this. But in the 90s, everything went crazy, because imagine this scarred, criminalized society where it's considered the norm to break the law, to cheat, and to bribe, and to smuggle things. When they hit capitalism, it was crazy. No one paid taxes anymore. In the early 90s, there was very little law going around. There was no control of the law. It was complete lawlessness. Those who were in the nomenclature and upper ranks before, they were either into prison or just had timely moved their money abroad and just moved abroad themselves, and they knew how to make stuff. But there were two types of people outside this nomenclatura, as you would call them, who could manage quite well. The first part were just, the simple guys who were drifting along, who were just doing what's asked from them. They were the absolute majority. They were the guys who kind of got along, but they never knew how to operate capitalism. But they were just the inert masses, so to speak. They were the guys living under the oppression. And then were those, so-called those who knew how to live types. You see, in the Soviet era, crimes against private people, against private property, it was terribly inefficient. I mean, yeah, sure, you can go and rob your neighbor, but it's not like your neighbor has anything more than you do. Therefore, all the crimes were against the state. But in the 90s, it just turned crazy, and it went wild, because now it was efficient. But in the Soviet era, these people who knew how to live, they were criminals already. Everyone was a criminal, like I said before, and for starters, income without work, income without creating value, was criminally punishable. It was exactly mentioned in the criminal code. So obviously, if you knew how to live properly and were one of these, sneaky guys who can manage things for living without working at all was very encouraged and looked as a great thing, an awesome thing, and everyone else who had to work for their existence were They thought of themselves as worse people, as terrible people. Weirdly enough, even though having a foreign currency could lead up to death penalty in the Soviet era, a lot of these people who knew how to live, so to speak, were using it. So, but what could you do to live this nice life, to live like you knew how to live? Well, if you didn't want to risk with this death penalty and you saved up your foreign currency for the black market deals or something very, very secret, you had two options. Either you bought and sold something to live the good life, Like you were one of these people who managed to smuggle like tulips to some our friendly neighbor countries and buy cheap radios in the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, bringing them back to the Soviet Union. Or more likely you did some regional stuff. Okay, it's hard to explain this, but the usual crimes of the Soviet Union, how it went, were like this. These people who knew how to live, who were risked, and who were criminals, and who were kind of idolized by everyone else, who thought themselves as miserable guys, and because everyone was oppressed. These guys lived by the fact that, there was never enough anything anywhere available in the stores. Like, for example, watermelons are grown in Azerbaijan. And a lot of them go to army. And not enough of them, because of bureaucracy or whatever, are brought to Moscow or St. Petersburg, mostly Moscow. Very, very small amount of them get their way to Moscow, but you have a huge amount of watermelons. So the local guy stuffs up a cargo truck with them. A cargo truck, by the way, which he can't either own or rent, but he still has access to it somehow. Because he's acquired some watermelons too, because for both the car and the watermelons, he's either stolen them, or he has bribed someone, or inside of kolkhoz, maybe he has taught the big guy of the kolkhoz, the director of the kolkhoz's grandmother, or how to speak English, or wife how to play piano, or something like that. Money was rarely involved, or maybe you brew such a great personal wine or vodka that you could just do bribes this way. So through some illegal means, you have a cargo truck and some watermelons if you stuff this there. Obviously, all of this is completely without papers, because you can't just drive a truck randomly full with cargo anywhere else in the Soviet Union. Because, oh no, it's completely illegal. What? This is not sanctioned by the government. You could go to prison or to GULAG for many, many years for doing this. So, if the cops stop you, it's either a large problem or, once again, a large sum of money. And, all the prices are the regular ones. Everybody who do this obviously knew exactly how much a cop would cost. This also stuck with us through the 90s. Oh yeah, and by the way, after you've done with the cops and everything, you couldn't even be legally in the marketplace selling these watermelons. So you again have to pay someone to ignore you, to just allow to park your truck in the far corner of the market, because there are no stores to whom you could sell this. You have to stand in the market all day selling watermelons from your truck. And you have to pay the right people to do this. So you sell all of this, and you go back to wherever you came from. And you have a bunch of money, which you could maybe save up, or for a car, or spend, or use on more bribes, or whatever. But if you're extra smart, you don't go straight back. No. You go to the black market and spend all the money you got from the watermelons on buying a bunch of jeans. And you put those in the truck to take back. Or maybe if you make a lot of money and you know exactly to whom give bribes, maybe you even grab a Volga car, the supreme luxury, one of those very luxurious Soviet cars. So you take those back, and you sell that. That is how people operated. They were criminals all along, and I don't know, these people were looked at as somehow better in this set up in our minds. Because people were scared and afraid, and, I don't know, early 20th century capitalists would do great in Soviet. If they could manage to stay under the radar. Which is just interesting. And when the economy collapses, and when you've been living under a prison system, you have these two types of people. One who just do their job, and the other who just don't even understand that they have been paid in free lunch company money vouchers. Because, rubles aren't worth anything. They're worth, after the collapse of the economy, they're worth exactly how much they're worth. And that's terrible, and the only people who knew how capitalism worked were these criminal types, were these ex-communists and these smugglers and stealers and thieves and these people. So we were just stuffed into a criminal era of a private sort right after we were stuffed into a criminal era from the communism. When seeking answers about how all of this impacted Soviet identity, how all of this worked, I looked at the fact that the glorious general question about, what the Soviet identity actually was. I mean, to think about what the impact of gulags and the KGB was on the Soviet people's look of themselves, and of how our views of ourselves have changed and what's left for us now, you have to look at how the Soviets viewed themselves, and there's nothing on this. Because identity implies some sort of individualism. They have a bunch of talks about the communist man, but it's all collectivist nonsense, essentially. We all were just a mindless mob, a group to be stuffed together, people who are just nothing more than cattle, who could be shot and moved and whatever, and everyone knew this, and they can't get out of this mentality even now for a lot of reasons. Like I said, this is heavy. This is like digging through my own brain, picking my own brain apart, and trying to figure what to make of this. And it's definitely not easy. One thing that is surely interesting about our identity is that it still follows some prison terms from all this KGB and Gulag stuff. They have this interesting saying, both in Latvian and in Russian, «Baidās tātad ciena». Боится значит уважает. Fears, that means respects you. Basically, if you can manage someone to get to fear you a lot, then that means that other person respects you. If you beat up your wife bloody so that she's afraid of you when you come home, that means she respects you because she's afraid to get beaten. That was a default thing. I remember my stepfather, when he was alive, he used to raise me that way. He used to tell me that was normal. When I was a kid, I thought that was normal. If you can intimidate someone, that means they respect you. All the respectful people are those from whom people are terribly afraid, even though they're complete criminals. Every risky move was like, oh no, you might get punished, it might end bad. But if you can make someone be afraid of you, then you're a respectable person. And all the Slavic squatting culture, all the memes on the internet, that's also a prison culture. So I don't know. We were left with the prison doors open. So this is how we grew up here. This is how we became who we are. This is why I'm making this podcast and why I'm apologizing all the time. These are the scars of my people. These are the scars of a lot of people in Eastern Europe. The Hungarians have their own scars. Czechs have their own scars. Slovenians, Slovaks, Poles, Lithuanians, Estonians, all of them, Moldavians, Romanians, pick any nation of our great and wonderful and splendid Eastern Bloc. We all have our pains here. We all are different, and mostly not because of our own choice, but because terrible things did happen to us. And we never experienced the big boom of the 70s, the big economic growth of capitalism that Western Europe and the United States experienced, which was apparently why the liberalism policies are on the rise today, because you guys can live happily and you've acquired this level of prosperity, at least so the experts think in my country when they discuss the reasons why we over here are way more conservative and sometimes seem weird to other people in the Western Europe, but it is how it is. We can't choose our own history. We can just learn from it, and I hope you have understood some things while listening to these series about gulags and punishments, because it's a collective punishment. It has always been a collective punishment. It's essentially called punishment for the reason that my people were punished for being there, for living, for not being as perfect and as devoted and as crazy as Soviets had intended to. There was no workers' paradise. There was just this bleak existence in a prison country. especially once you knew that the Soviets had just killed a lot of your family members. And in January, we'll start talking about the Russian Revolution, starting from the very basics up to Khrushchev's era, where we started, with a lot of specials in between. But that's the general direction where we're going. I'm just gonna finish up with the 90s episodes, and then we're gonna do some other stuff. Don't worry, this podcast is gonna go on because a lot of the material that I'm talking about is not even available yet. I mean, in 2 years, some materials from the archives, which I tend to read, will only become available and become no longer a secret, demystified, so to speak. A lot of these things are still kept in archives. A lot of important documents are still there, and there's no access to historians to look at them, and there is no justice. There is no happy ending here. There is no great success or anything. And while a lot of people in Western Europe are Eurosceptical, well, we here are quite positive about the European Union. Somewhat. Because what else can we do? I mean, you guys in the West have a choice. Britain can afford to leave the EU. We can't. Other countries can choose not to do their NATO obligations and not to pay their 2%. Well, we can't. So we have this written in the law, and we're moving. Since we joined NATO, we have been steadily improving our defense budget and payments to NATO every year, and we're going to hit the 2% next year. We can't do otherwise. It's like we're stuck again. We're just there. We have to do what we have to do. And Hungary or Poland, they have more population, they have bigger militaries, they have a bit more wage room there, but they're as traumatized as we are. We're even smaller than they are, and we're like right next to Russia. So this is how it's all been going here. And I don't know, I'll be discussing the early 90s and what happened just after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the next regular episode, because the next episode is going to be a special gift of those people who like grand strategy games, namely Europe Universalis, Crusader Kings, and Hearts of Iron. But that's a hush-hush surprise. But in general, yeah. I don't know, if this show has been so far for me the explanation of my people and telling my story, then actually this series just combines it all, collects in one piece, and I don't even know what to say at the end. I sound like a dreadful amateur who hasn't prepared, but that is not the case. It's just that all I can do is wave my arms around and say, well, here we are. Here we are, and I don't know. I don't hold any specific angry political views towards anyone or hold any grudges or something. But this is why I'm so pro-free speech, so pro-debates, pro-different arguments, letting other people speak and trying to be neutral about all of this. Because I've been raised in a society where that was a value. I have learned to appreciate the fact that I can speak my opinion freely. And the fact that anyone can do that, that is one of the most important things to me. And that's one positive thing I can tell you about how the people in these areas think and the scars left us. Because that is exactly the thing that we missed. Freedom. And not a freedom of doing something great or whatever. No, the freedom of thinking. The freedom of speech. And I would like to finish this episode, even though it's a bit shorter than usual, but again, I have to finish this terribly hard series with something that makes sense, and the only thing that makes sense at the moment is just to tell you, don't forget, dear listeners, that you are free. And you are only as free as that guy over there whom you might disagree with, whom you hate, who voted for the wrong candidate that you didn't like, whatever. You are as free as he is. As long as he is that free. There is no being freer than the other group. Either you're all free or none of you is free. And that's the thing. It's a bit of moralizing, but that's all I can give you tonight. I hope you learned something from this show, and I promise you, next episodes are going to be a bit more easier and a bit more peaceful. До свидания, товарищ.
Thank you for listening to The Eastern Border. If you have any comments or specific details you'd like to know, you're welcome to leave it in the comment section on our site, theeasternborder.lv, and we'll rummage even to the western border to find you an answer. Like this podcast, subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our RSS feed. Happiness is mandatory. Good reviews and donations feed the farmers of our kolkhozs in the great motherland. The Eastern Border salutes you. This podcast is part of the Dark Myths Collective. Visit darkmyths.org for more shows like this one. The darkness awaits.